I had always thought our home in Portland would stay the same, quiet, predictable, a steady rhythm of work, meals, and occasional small talk. My name is Marina, and I had grown used to the calm, measured pace of our lives. David, my stepfather, had been part of the family for several years now, always calm, considerate, and steady. Nothing about him ever demanded attention. Rather, he commanded it subtly, with quiet confidence. Recently, though, I noticed small changes in the way we interacted. They were subtle, almost imperceptible, but persistent. A glance that lingered a little longer than necessary, a gentle smile that seemed to carry unspoken warmth, a quiet attentiveness that left me both shy and comforted. I found myself looking forward to moments that had previously passed unnoticed. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to make a cup of chamomile tea. The sun had already set, and the kitchen was lit softly by the warm glow of the overhead lights. David was sitting at the table, reading the newspaper, his posture relaxed. As I entered, he looked up and smiled. It was a simple, warm smile, but for a fleeting second, I felt my heartbeat quicken. "Late for tea," he said, his voice calm and light. There was no disapproval in it, only the hint of a gentle tease. "You're still awake too?" I asked, attempting a small, casual smile, though I felt a tiny flutter in my chest. He folded the newspaper and leaned back slightly, resting his hands on the table. "Sometimes it's nice to just sit quietly," he said softly, "especially with good company." I poured the hot water into my mug, the faint aroma of chamomile filling the air. I lingered a moment longer over the small motions, stirring gently, pretending to be occupied. Yet I could not ignore the warmth spreading through me at his words. There was something about the way he spoke, calm, steady, caring, that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. As I sipped my tea, I found myself noticing him more deliberately. The way he tilted his head slightly while reading, the softness in his eyes when he smiled, the quiet attentiveness that seemed to notice even the smallest details about me. It was subtle but powerful. Somehow it made the ordinary feel extraordinary. Over the next few days, these quiet moments multiplied. When we cooked together, our hands occasionally brushed while reaching for the same utensil. When we shared a laugh over a small joke, our eyes would meet, and we would hold the look just a little longer than necessary. Even the mundane moments, pouring tea, clearing the dishes, watching television, felt charged with a new significance. "You notice everything, don't you?" I said one evening, trying to sound teasing. My voice carried a slight tremor, though I tried to mask it. "I notice because I care," he replied softly, a warm smile tugging at his lips. Those words settled over me like a gentle embrace. I realized then that a bond was forming, subtle but unmistakable. Not romantic in the conventional sense, there was nothing inappropriate, but something deeper. A quiet connection that made ordinary interactions feel weighty and meaningful. One rainy evening, I returned from the living room with my tea to find David had already lit the fireplace. The flames cast flickering shadows across the walls, giving the room a warm, cozy glow. I sat on the couch beside him, careful to place my cup on the side table. We didn't speak immediately. We simply listened to the soft patter of rain against the window and the occasional crackle from the fire. After a few minutes, our conversation emerged naturally. Small talk about our day, trivial observations, memories from the past. And yet, even these simple exchanges felt charged with a gentle intimacy. When our hands brushed lightly while adjusting the blanket or reaching for a book, neither of us pulled away. Instead, a quiet understanding passed between us. We were not merely sharing a room, but a moment of trust and comfort. The evenings became a pattern. We would cook together, share tea, and sit side by side in the living room. We told stories about our pasts. David spoke of his childhood in Oregon, his work, and his small pleasures. I told him about my ambitions, friends, and experiences. Sometimes he would tease me gently, and I would roll my eyes, laugh, and then catch myself smiling in a way that lingered a bit longer than necessary. In the quiet, I began noticing his attentiveness more consciously. He had a way of observing without intruding, of making me feel both acknowledged and at ease. A glance, a soft tone, a small smile, all carried a gentle reassurance. And in return, I found myself responding with care, warmth, and the anticipation of seeing him again in these shared quiet moments. One night, as the rain fell softly outside, we sat on the couch wrapped in a shared blanket. He reached over to adjust it, and our hands brushed lightly. Neither of us pulled away. "Sometimes," he said softly, "it's enough just to be like this. No need for words." I nodded, feeling a quiet comfort in his words. There was no pressure, no expectation, just a shared understanding. And in that simple, quiet gesture, I realized that what was forming between us was rare. A bond built not on grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but on attention, care, and gentle emotional intimacy. The rain continued to fall outside, a steady rhythm against the windows, as if the world itself had slowed to match the calm of our home. David and I sat in comfortable silence on the couch, wrapped in the warmth of the shared blanket. I watched the flames flicker in the fireplace, catching the golden light in his hair and the soft lines of his face. For the first time, I felt as though our home was not just a place to live. It was a space where quiet understanding could grow into something deeper. I traced the rim of my mug with my fingers, pretending to be absorbed in the warmth of the tea, yet I couldn't ignore the occasional glance I stole at him. He seemed equally aware of the space between us, his posture relaxed but his eyes attentive. There was an unspoken dialogue happening, soft smiles, lingering looks, small shifts of the body, that said far more than words could. "You know," he said quietly, breaking the silence, "I've always appreciated these evenings. Just sitting talking, or even just being here without needing to fill the air with words." I smiled softly, letting the steam from my tea brush against my face. "Me too," I admitted. "It's comforting. Somehow different from anything else." He nodded, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "Different in a good way?" "Yes," I whispered. "Very good." We sat like that for a long while, listening to the rain and feeling the warmth from the fireplace. The occasional touch, our hands brushing as we reached for our mugs, a gentle nudge when adjusting the blanket, felt significant. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic actions. It was about noticing, about small acts of attention that communicated care and trust. In the following days, this quiet rhythm became part of our routine. We cooked together in the evenings, exchanged small jokes while washing dishes, and shared stories from our pasts. David had a way of listening that made every word I said feel important, even the trivial ones. And I realized I was doing the same for him, paying attention not just to what he said but to the nuances in his expressions, the slight inflections in his voice, the way he moved through the house. One afternoon, as I was reorganizing the kitchen shelves, I found him standing nearby, casually sipping a cup of coffee. Our eyes met, and he raised an eyebrow playfully. "You know," he said, "you have a habit of making ordinary tasks seem special." I laughed lightly, feeling my cheeks warm. "Is that so?" "Yes," he replied, his tone soft but firm. "It's the way you focus on little things. It makes them matter more than they normally would." I felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and warmth at his words. There was no pressure, no expectation, just a recognition of the way I approached the world, a quiet acknowledgement that made me feel seen. Later that evening, we found ourselves in the living room again. I was curled up with a book while he worked on some notes for his job at the dining table. Occasionally, our conversation would drift over small comments about the weather, a shared memory, or a joke. At one point, he looked up from his papers and said softly, "I like these moments with you. They feel calm but alive at the same time." I set my book aside, feeling a warmth spread across my chest. "I feel the same," I admitted. "It's nice having someone who notices things like you do." His gaze softened and he leaned back slightly, resting one hand on the table. "You know," he said quietly, "it's not just noticing. It's appreciating. Seeing the effort, the care, the thought behind things. That's what makes these moments meaningful." I nodded, feeling an unspoken understanding deepen between us. Our bond was growing, not in dramatic leaps, but in small, careful steps. Every shared smile, every attentive glance, every casual touch added layers to the quiet intimacy that defined our evenings. A week later, the weather had turned chilly, and the first hints of autumn had begun to appear outside. We were in the kitchen again, preparing dinner together. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the room, and the soft glow from the overhead lights made the familiar space feel almost magical. "You always seem to make cooking more enjoyable," David said casually, chopping vegetables with precise, relaxed movements. I laughed softly. "And you make it seem easier somehow, like it's not just a task but an experience." He glanced at me, eyes twinkling. "Maybe that's the point. To turn ordinary things into moments worth remembering." The warmth in his voice, the calm confidence in his presence, made my heart feel lighter. There was no tension, no expectation, just the simple, profound connection of two people appreciating each other's presence. Later that evening, we sat together in the living room again. I had a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and he had a mug of tea in hand. The fire crackled softly, and the room was filled with the gentle hum of quiet contentment. I realized that these moments had become the highlight of my days. Not because of anything extraordinary happening, but because of the ease and trust that had grown between us. When our hands brushed as we reached for the blanket, neither of us pulled away. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried all the weight of our shared understanding. Attention, warmth, trust, and the quiet beginnings of a bond that neither of us needed to name to feel profoundly real. Days passed, and the quiet rhythm of our evenings had become something I began to anticipate with a warmth I couldn't easily describe. Portland's autumn was settling in fully now. The chill in the air, the rustle of leaves outside, the soft gray light of early evenings, and somehow it made our home feel cozier, more intimate, as though the world outside had slowed to match the calm inside. One evening I was sitting at the kitchen table, sketching small doodles in a notebook while David prepared dinner. The sound of chopping vegetables, the occasional clink of utensils, and the muted hum of the oven created a gentle soundtrack for the room. Every so often, our eyes would meet over the rim of our mugs, and a small smile would pass between us. It was subtle, yet it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "You're very focused," he said quietly, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. "I like that about you. You notice the details." I looked up, slightly embarrassed. "Do I?" I asked softly, trying to hide the warmth that had spread across my cheeks. "Yes," he replied, his tone calm and sincere. "It's a rare quality. Makes everything you do feel thoughtful." His words, though simple, settled around me like a blanket. I felt a deep appreciation for how he could recognize the small, almost invisible efforts I put into everyday tasks. It wasn't flattery, it was attentiveness, and it made me feel safe, seen, and understood. After dinner, we moved to the living room, each of us with a mug of tea. The fire was already crackling, casting a warm glow over the room. I curled up on the couch with a blanket draped over my shoulders, and David settled into the armchair nearby. We didn't need words at first. The quiet presence of each other was enough. Occasionally, our conversations would pick up, small exchanges about books we were reading, the weather, or shared memories. Even mundane topics felt richer, more meaningful, because they were spoken in the space of our shared attentiveness. I noticed the slight tilt of his head when he listened, the gentle focus in his eyes, the ease with which he made me feel like my thoughts mattered. One evening, the rain returned, pattering gently against the windows. We were seated side by side on the couch, our mugs warming our hands. I felt the subtle proximity, the ease of sitting close without needing to speak. Occasionally, Our hands would brush as we adjusted the blanket or shifted positions. Neither of us pulled away. The touches were natural, unforced, yet they carried a quiet intimacy that made the ordinary feel extraordinary. "You know," he said softly, his gaze directed at the flames, "these evenings remind me of why I enjoy home so much. Not the place itself, but the people in it. Moments like this, quiet and simple, they matter more than anything else." I nodded, feeling my chest warm. "I know what you mean. There's something grounding about this. Just being here like this." His eyes met mine, and for a moment the room felt suspended in time. I realized that the connection we were developing was more than casual companionship. It was a mutual appreciation, a quiet bond built on trust, attentiveness, and the subtle joy of being seen. Over the next weeks, our routine deepened. We found ourselves sharing small tasks around the house, enjoying each other's company in simple, unhurried ways. Cooking together became a shared ritual. Sometimes we laughed at minor mishaps, other times we worked in synchrony without needing to speak. In these moments, I felt a growing sense of trust and comfort, as though the small acts of care and attention were quietly knitting us together. One evening, David suggested we make a pot of hot cider, spiced with cinnamon and clove. The aroma filled the kitchen, mingling with the faint scent of falling leaves drifting through the slightly open window. We stood side by side, stirring the cider gently, and I felt the ease of our proximity. Our shoulders brushed occasionally, and I noticed how natural it felt not to pull away. "It's nice," he said softly, "to have someone who notices the little things, who makes ordinary tasks feel shared." I smiled, looking up at him. "I feel the same. It's rare, isn't it?" "Yes," he replied, eyes soft. "But that's why it matters." Later, as we carried mugs of cider to the living room, the firelight flickering across our faces, I realized how deeply these small, quiet moments had settled into my life. The connection between us was subtle, never overt, but profoundly meaningful. Each glance, each gentle touch, each shared laugh built a quiet intimacy that neither of us needed to name for it to feel real. Sitting side by side on the couch, I felt the rhythm of our bond in the quiet gestures. The way he handed me my mug, the casual touch of his hand brushing mine as we settled into our spots, the ease of silence punctuated by soft conversation. There was no urgency, no expectation, only the growing warmth of understanding and trust. That night, as I sipped my cider, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Our evenings were no longer just routines. They had become moments of subtle, shared intimacy, a bond built on attentiveness, care, and quiet appreciation. And though I didn't know what the future held, I felt certain that whatever it was, these evenings would remain a cornerstone of our connection. Autumn deepened outside, and the days grew shorter. Yet inside our Portland home, the warmth of the fire and the quiet rhythm of our evenings created a world apart from the brisk wind and falling leaves outside. David and I had settled into a comfortable intimacy, one built on small gestures, shared moments, and the subtle awareness of each other's presence. One Sunday afternoon, the light from the low sun spilled across the living room floor, creating patterns through the window blinds. I was curled up on the couch with a blanket, reading a book, while David worked at the table nearby. Occasionally, he would glance up, offering a small, gentle smile. I realized that this smile had become a signal, a quiet acknowledgement that we were both aware of the connection growing between us. At one point, he looked over from the table. "Do you ever think about how simple moments like this can feel significant?" he asked softly. I closed my book and met his gaze. "Yes," I admitted. "It's like the quiet makes everything else fade away. Just this moment matters." He nodded, his eyes warm and steady. "Exactly. And that's why I appreciate these evenings so much. It's not about anything dramatic. It's about the presence, the attention, the shared calm." I smiled, feeling a sense of deep contentment. There was no rush, no expectation, just the recognition of a connection that had grown naturally over time. Our home had become more than just walls and furniture. It was a space where trust, care, and subtle affection had the room to grow. That evening, we prepared dinner together. The familiar rhythm of chopping, stirring, and occasionally laughing at minor mishaps making the kitchen feel like a private sanctuary. As we worked, our hands would brush now and then, unremarkable yet meaningful. Neither of us pulled away, and I felt the quiet thrill of companionship, the sense that we were sharing something deeper than words could capture. Afterward, we carried our plates and mugs of tea to the living room. The fire crackled softly, and the room glowed in the gentle warmth. We settled side by side on the couch, a blanket draped around both of us, and let the quiet fill the space. It was comfortable, intimate, and profoundly reassuring. "You know," David said softly, "I think I've learned more about patience and attention in these past months than ever before." I turned to look at him, curious. "How so?" "Just by being here," he replied, eyes steady. "Not rushing, not demanding, just noticing and appreciating the small moments. It's grounding, and it's made me value the quiet connections even more." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I feel the same. There's something special about these evenings. Even the simplest moments feel fuller." As the evening deepened, the room seemed to shrink to just the two of us, the fire, and the gentle glow of the lamps. Our hands brushed lightly again as we reached for our mugs. This time we didn't pull away. Instead, a quiet understanding passed between us. This was our shared space, our bond built not on grand gestures but on the quiet, consistent attention we gave each other. For the first time, I realized how deeply I trusted him, not just as a stepfather, but as someone whose presence brought a calm and warmth I could rely on. It was not romantic in the traditional sense, but a tender, emotional closeness that mattered just as much. We could sit together in silence, laugh softly, exchange glances, and every gesture carried meaning. Later, as the fire dimmed and the room fell into the soft shadows of evening, we lingered on the couch. I sipped the last of my tea, feeling its warmth spread through me. David reached over, gently adjusting the blanket around my shoulders. I felt the quiet comfort of his care, the understated reassurance in his presence. "You know," he said softly, "you don't need to do anything but be yourself. Being here just as you are is enough." I smiled, feeling a gentle flush on my cheeks. "I know, and I'm grateful for that." We stayed like that for a long time, neither of us speaking much, yet sharing everything through presence, small gestures, and the calm attentiveness that had become the foundation of our connection. There was no pressure, no expectation, only a quiet intimacy that felt lasting and real. Finally, the fire dwindled to glowing embers, and we rose together to tidy the room before heading to bed. As we walked through the house, our hands brushed once more, naturally, without thought, and I realized that these simple, quiet moments had become the core of our bond. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the weeks and months we had spent cultivating this gentle, unspoken closeness. It was a relationship built on respect, trust, care, and the quiet joy of noticing and being noticed. I felt a deep sense of peace and anticipation for the evenings yet to come, because we had discovered that the truest connections were not always loud or dramatic. They were the quiet evenings, the soft glances, the brushed hands, the shared silences, and the steady warmth of someone who truly saw you. And in that quiet, I knew our bond had become something permanent, subtle, and profoundly meaningful. The home that had once felt ordinary now radiated with warmth, comfort, and the gentle rhythm of shared life. And in that quiet understanding, I finally realized, sometimes the simplest moments can be the most extraordinary.